with being the director of our ecological services section and with the Kansas Wildlife and Parks, our purview for the agency is dealing with non-game and threatened endangered species. And so we're often looking at different aspects that kind of coincide with the non-game, relevancy, and those different aspects. So we got to looking at, and Darren and I and some others had sit down and we'd been discussing different things about the different parts of our agency where we lack information. One of the parts of that was we were providing a revision of our state wildlife action plan and including plants and some other things for Recovering America's Wildlife Act. And we got to looking at some of the recreational uses and things like that need to be added to our plan. And we identified that there's a huge lack of information and understanding on wildlife viewers' roles for enhancing our agency's relevancy and engaging support from broader constituencies. So when we discussed this, we, really there's a few surveys out there nationally, but not a whole lot of information state specific. We have a few surveys that barely touch on this subject. So yeah, we just don't understand the behaviors, wildlife viewers' behaviors, experience, their perceptions, and their needs and preferences, and currently how is our agency working to deal with those type of things for them and meeting those needs for them. So we were, as always, we're part of AFWA, so we had heard that that Virginia Tech had received the MultiState Conservation Grant to address this specific question, and there was an opportunity through the not the Wildlife Diversity, the Nature Tourism and Viewing Committee, and so yeah, we realized that there was an option for us to do some state specific information as well. So we made contact with Ashley and kind of got her going with the state specific results, and that's where we're at today. We're proud to have glad to have Ashley and Emily here to provide us those results, and then we'll feel free to have questions and discuss things at the end, and we'll also have a potential phase 2 option that I think we'll maybe discuss as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Ashley.
That's great. Thanks so much, Chris. And yeah, we will talk about the phase 2 component at the end. So let me share my screen here. All right, Emily, does it look good?
Yes, you're good to go.
Excellent. All right, so as Chris mentioned, this Kansas-specific project and presentation that we'll be sharing with you today is part of a larger multi-state grant that we received through AFWA and in partnership with the Wildlife Viewing and Nature Tourism Working Group. But today we're going to be focusing in on the Kansas-specific component. So thanks everybody for joining us. I know we're close to the holidays here, and probably things are busy wrapping up at work. We hope that you're going to be able to see some insights today that will be relevant to your work in Kansas, your work in partnership with the agency, as well as your work in your own agencies and organizations as well. So what I encourage you to do as we go through this presentation is think about which parts of it are things that are surprising to you, which parts are things that you would expect, what might change how you are approaching the work that you're doing, or give you some ideas for different work to do in the future. And that can then loop back around to the conversation that we'll have at the end about phase 2, which is an opportunity to work with other states in implementation of these results within various states, but in collaboration with others. So our focus here today is the Kansas Wildlife Viewer Survey results. And we have a state-specific report that is a lot more detailed than we're going to be able to cover today. It's really extensive, covers all of the findings from the entire survey, as well as has figures and tables for everything. Today, we're going to call out the highlights, the things that we think might be most relevant for discussion, but encourage you to check out at least the executive summary and the recommendations of the full report. And then if there's some component of the presentation that we talk about that you'd like to dig in a little bit more on, or use the results as evidence for some grant that you're applying for, we encourage you to check out those sections too. So Emily's put the link to it in the chat. And in addition, we provided the QR code here. We'll also be sending out a wrap-up email after the holidays where we include all the links that we've given today. So if you don't catch them all, that's an option as well. So we introduced ourselves as we got started. I'm Ashley Dare. I'm an associate professor at Virginia Tech. Emily Sincular is a master's student, and she's the lead author on this report. And then Christy Petoskey, a PhD student, was also a co-author on this report. The three of us are part of a larger team of folks who've worked on this project, including several others from Virginia Tech, and then our collaborators in the Wildlife Viewing and Nature Tourism Working Group, as well as all of the state members who are part of our steering committee, including Chris and Darren. And we're really grateful for all of the insights and thoughts that we had throughout the project that have really made this a great collaboration between state agencies and us at Virginia Tech, hopefully then providing data that's really relevant to the work of state agencies. So today in the webinar, we're going to focus on the survey findings, one focusing on a profile of who are wildlife viewers in Kansas, and thinking about how the Kansas agency, Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks, can best support wildlife viewers. And I'd say while the results are relevant to the agency, many of them I think are more broadly relevant to the agency and partners working in conservation in the state. Then also, how can there be a focus on broadening relevance to wildlife viewers who do not hunt and fish? And you'll see that we share a lot of results about the overlap between viewing and hunting and fishing. And then finally, how can agencies work to develop financial support opportunities for wildlife viewers? What might be of interest to Kansans? So let me tell you a little bit about the background and how we got started on this project. You heard Chris's perspective of why Kansas as an agency was specifically interested, but why did more broadly this project start? And before I do so, I want to make sure that we're all on the same page about what we mean by wildlife viewers. We used a definition based very closely on the wildlife viewing and nature, or the wildlife viewing, wildlife hunting and recreation survey at the national level. I'm messing up all my words here. And so the definition there talks about observing, feeding, and photographing wildlife, as well as visiting parks or natural areas to observe, feed, or photograph wildlife, and then maintaining plantings or natural areas for the benefit of the wildlife. The thing I want to emphasize from the National Survey's definition is that simply noticing wildlife while doing something else doesn't count. And so people who are gardening and they happen to see wildlife, or people who are exercising, hunting, or fishing, or intentionally scouting for game, none of those things were considered wildlife viewing. And we specifically said that at the beginning of the survey to make sure that we were getting people who were intentionally observers of wildlife. So of course, you've seen the national survey results, I'm sure. When I talk about the national survey, again, this is the National Survey of Hunting, Fishing, and Wildlife-Related Recreation, the tongue twister that I couldn't get previously. And in 2011, the state-specific survey from that project said that there's 792,000 adults in Kansas who view wildlife. The current survey is underway for the updated numbers on that. But at the national level, there were found to be 14.3 million additional viewers from 2011 to 2016. So the national participation rate was about a third of the public over 16. And that increase in participation and viewing came primarily from a rise in around the home viewing. And you're going to hear that echoed throughout our presentation, this really big emphasis on around the home viewing being very popular for people. At the same time, as I'm sure you're aware, hunting and angling rates have declined or remained stable. And so a lot of agencies have expressed an interest in thinking about how can they interact more, engage more with wildlife viewers as another constituency who has an interest in wildlife recreation and wildlife conservation and management. As we started the project, we asked all of our steering committee members and the states who were involved in the state-specific surveys, why were they interested in this? And we heard, of course, about these trends that I just shared with you. And states emphasized that there's potential influence amongst the wildlife viewing community that is such a large component of their state's public. Also, they brought up that the viewers can be really difficult for agencies to reach. While there's a nice database of hunters or anglers, or maybe those who boat within your state, there isn't in most states a very easy way to reach out to wildlife viewers. And so different projects have tried different approaches. I was part of the North American Waterfowl Management Plan project where we used those who registered for eBird. But there was a desire to try to figure out how could we try to get at that more general type of wildlife viewer who isn't someone who's also a citizen scientist. And then there's a lack of information on viewers' thoughts, preferences, and behaviors. So the National Survey of Hunting, Fishing, and Wildlife-Related Recreation tells us what number of people view and tells us how much money they spend on viewing and what types of birds they like to view. But it doesn't go into what do they think about an agency or what are their preferences for viewing opportunities or what would help support them in viewing more. So we were trying to provide those sorts of insights to states as they thought about how they could interact better with their viewers. Also, the opportunity to better serve and communicate with viewers was very much on the mind of a lot of the state agencies we were working with. And then they were also interested in how could they serve those who were not closely tied to the agency already, and thinking about the connection of underserved groups and underrepresented groups or minority groups, thinking that probably the best inroads to having a relationship with the agency was wildlife viewing as opposed to maybe other types of wildlife recreation. And then finally connecting viewers with mechanisms to contribute financially to agencies. So those were the things that we kept in mind as key places where these insights might be valuable. You all might have different ideas of why you're interested in hearing about wildlife viewers, and I welcome you to put any of those in the meeting chat as well, and we'll keep them in mind as we go along. We are sharing here now a link and also the QR code to a broader literature review we did that also helped inform the survey. It went into what are the findings related to wildlife viewers, whether it be specific to birders or more broadly wildlife viewers that might be relevant, not only in the design of our survey, but to state agencies too, and actually anyone else who wants to work with viewers. So we primarily focused on the literature from the US where it wasn't available. We expanded out a bit more broadly. And within this literature review, we tried to make it really accessible, easy for people to digest and pull out the key findings under headings like who are wildlife viewers? What do wildlife viewers do related to wildlife or related to conservation? So encourage you to check that out, use that as a resource. It provides citations to all of the key studies and gives you a place to go if you want to look at more literature. And then the other reference that I wanted to provide for you before we shift gears here is that we did do, as Chris said, the broader national and regional survey. And in that broader survey, we have findings split up by region. So for those of you who work at a regional level, like Matt, you might be interested in looking at what did the Midwest findings show. And so if you are interested in comparing Kansas to those regions, feel free to take a look there or to share it with any other colleagues. The other part that might be of interest to you within this report is that we provide case studies in the recommendations section of the national report. And you'll see some of those presented here today, but there's even more in there. And those are case studies of things that states have been doing that have been successful to engage wildlife viewers, and that our data appears to be in line with supporting that sort of approach as something that would probably be useful to viewers. Okay, I'm going to turn things over to Emily, and she's going to share with you the methods that we used for this project.
Thank you for the introduction, Ashley. It's good to see you all. Hi, Laura. Before I get started, I just wanted to say how this is one of my favorite parts of the research we're doing. A lot of the times in academia, we can be really focused on our numbers and the stats and publishing things. But Ashley and I really enjoy this work because it's an opportunity to see what we find be implemented and go on to have real impacts in the people and agencies and conservation throughout the country. With that, I'll talk a little bit more about the survey itself and how we did it. This survey was a part of a broader project across the United States. You can see here from our oversampling map, Kansas was a group of about a little over a dozen states that had their own survey and report done. The survey in Kansas had 765 good and complete respondents, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. And this survey consisted of over 100 questions, and we sampled online through Qualtrics just about exactly a year ago from October to December of 2021. Did want to talk a little bit more about the sample size here in Kansas, just to kind of give you an idea of our confidence level in Kansas. So with our sample of 765 respondents from Kansas and the estimated population of about 800,000 wildlife viewers in Kansas, our margin of error for these results is 3.5%, meaning whenever you see a percent, it's kind of like 52% plus or minus 3.5 for that actual estimate here in Kansas. Our survey opened up first with a screening question, which asked respondents in which, if any, of the following forms of wildlife viewing have you participated in over the past 5 years? And that was that list of behaviors Ashley talked about at the beginning of our presentation, like feeding wildlife, observing wildlife, photographing wildlife, or maybe traveling somewhere to view, observe, or feed wildlife. If someone said no, I haven't participated in any of these behaviors at all in the past 5 years, they were removed from our survey, because we really wanted to hone in on those intentional wildlife viewers and understand their kind of behaviors and perceptions of Kansas rather than just the casual observer. The 117 questions in the survey covered an awful lot of information, including the demographic characteristics of wildlife viewers, their viewing behaviors and interests, so what types of wildlife they like to view, their duration, location, and frequency of participation in wildlife, their participation in other outdoor recreation like hunting and fishing, but also things like hiking and camping, their level of specialization in wildlife viewing. So this was kind of their skill level, how often they view, and if they have any equipment for wildlife viewing. We also took a brief look at the wildlife viewing related expenditures, though that national survey done by the Fish and Wildlife Service has a bit more information about that. We examined the barriers or constraints to participation in social science in wildlife viewing, as well as that social support, so maybe friends and family and peers, and then their likelihood of participating in conservation behaviors alone or with the agency. We also really wanted to take a close look at what wildlife viewers thought and experienced with the KDWP. So first, we looked at their familiarity with, perceptions of, and trust in the KDWP. We also took a look at their experience with the KDWP programs and services, and this is something that Chris and Darren helped us to really customize to what you have available in Kansas at the time of the survey. We looked at past financial contributions to the KDWP, as well as the likelihood of these wildlife viewers to support the KDWP financially or through those conservation behaviors like picking up trash and litter. And finally, we also looked at their preferred forms of viewing support and communications, like what social media platform from the KDWP. We conducted this survey with a panel survey. And for those of you who aren't familiar, a panel survey is an online survey platform of individuals recruited to take surveys. These respondents are compensated for their participation, usually through something like an Amazon gift card or other monetary forms like that. And because we're looking with these pools of people who have been paid for those surveys, we take a few extra steps to ensure that we have really good completion and people paid attention to the survey, so we're getting valuable and accurate data. And so for that, we had attention checks, time limits, and quotas for our data. So the first thing that we had to ensure a higher data quality was these attention checks. Attention checks for us were kind of pairs of conflicting statements throughout the survey. So for example, one statement may be wildlife viewing is a very important part of my life. And another statement might be wildlife viewing is not a very important part of my life. And if someone agreed, like indicated that they strongly agreed or strongly disagreed with both of those statements, that flags to us that they might just be clicking through the survey and not paying as much attention. And so people who failed 2 of these attention checks were actually removed from the survey. So those 765 people who were those good completes were those who didn't fail 2 or more of our attention checks. Another step that we took to ensure high data quality was minimum completion time. When we first piloted the survey through Qualtrics, our survey platform, we sent it to about 110 people who completed it. From that, we were able to establish a minimum completion time, and everybody who completed the survey faster than that time was also removed from our final set. Our data, our data analysis, we use descriptive statistics for the statewide results. We also use chi-square tests and t-tests to explore differences among consumptive and non-consumptive wildlife viewers, and I'll talk a little bit more about them in a few slides. And this data set is actually openly available for further analysis if anyone wants to take a look at it here. I've just put the link into the chat, and the next slide has a QR code. So this data set consists of first a PDF of the survey, so just the survey instrument, what people in Kansas saw as they took it. It also includes a .csv file or a comma separated file that you can use in Excel or another platform. And we also have a .sav file of the data, which is something that works in the SPSS or the statistical package for social science. And I wanted to return now to that discussion of the consumptive and non-consumptive wildlife viewers. Now we know, or kind of traditionally before I went back to grad school, I was working with the Park Service, and I really thought of non-consumptive wildlife related recreationists as those who would just come and look at birds, or maybe they'll have bird feeders, but they're really just interested in viewing wildlife. And when I thought about consumptive wildlife related recreationists, I thought about those hunters and anglers, and I didn't really see a lot of overlap between those two groups. But as we've dove into this research, we found that there's actually a lot of overlap with our consumptive wildlife related recreationists, so those hunters and anglers, and those and wildlife viewers. So throughout this presentation, you're going to see some purple and green groups. The purple represents the non-consumptive wildlife viewers, people who have not hunted or fished in the past 5 years. And the consumptive viewers are in this kind of bright lime green, and those are people who have hunted or fished in the past 5 years. And I wanted to note that we use this frame of the past 5 years in order just to kind of account for some of the change in behavior that may have occurred during COVID-19. As we did this survey in 2021, we recognize that in some states, their normal recreation patterns from 2020 to 2021 might be different because of some things that happened during the pandemic. So that's why you'll see 5 years. Looking at our consumptive and non-consumptive viewers in Kansas, we had just a little over half of our respondents were non-consumptive viewers, so they don't participate in hunting or angling, and 47% were consumptive wildlife viewers. And I wanted to take a little closer look at our consumptive viewers and their behaviors. So first, 32%, or about a third of our total sample in Kansas, said that they only fish and view wildlife. 3% of respondents in Kansas said that they participated in hunting and wildlife viewing. And 12% of our respondents are really busy and participated in hunting, angling, and wildlife viewing. Now I'm going to dive a little bit more into our results before passing it back to Ashley. So this slide here reviews our 3 quotas that we set for this survey. These quotas were demographic characteristics like age, gender, and education that we set to match against that national survey of fishing, hunting, and wildlife-related recreation. This kind of helped us to target our survey to a known population of wildlife viewing to ensure that we were able to really provide an adequate representation of people who are wildlife viewers in Kansas. So our mean age of survey respondents in Kansas was just about 48 years old. There's about a 50-50 split between men and women, and a little less than 1% of the respondents said that they were non-binary or preferred to self-describe their gender. And then about 13% of the respondents in Kansas had 4 years or more of higher education. And these are all detailed a little bit more on the report if you want to take a closer look at that breakdown of education or age. We also took a look at their respondents' ethno-racial identity. This was something that we did not set a quota against. We found that about 84%, so if you look at this box here on the bottom left of your screen, 84% of our respondents were white only, meaning that they identified as white and no other race or ethnicity. 16% of respondents in Kansas were BIPOC or Black, Indigenous, or people of color. And this might mean that they identified as one of these other races. Perhaps they were Hispanic or Latino and a combination of another race. Now, you'll note that about 5% of the respondents who identified as white also identified as another ethno-racial identity, which is why they're included in the 16% BIPOC row on the bottom. We also just touched on the household income of wildlife viewers in Kansas. And just less than half of the respondents reported their total household income as $50,000 annually or less, while about 20% reported their total household income of $100,000 or more. And this graph here is the first time we're seeing that green and purple I was talking about with consumptive and non-consumptive viewers. First, I wanted to point out that those hatched, or that kind of black and white bar, is the statewide respondents. So that's a combination of everybody who's consumptive and non-consumptive. And then the green is consumptive, so hunters and anglers, and the purple is non-consumptive. And here on the bottom left, again, you'll see we did find a statistically significant difference between consumptive and non-consumptive viewers. And the general pattern seemed to be that a little bit more of non-consumptive viewers resided in urban or small city areas, while a little bit more consumptive viewers lived in small towns or rural areas. And the final aspect I'll talk about before passing this back to Ashley is the forms of wildlife viewing behaviors. So we asked respondents, which forms of wildlife viewing have you participated in the past 5 years? Gave them this whole list of those behaviors. This was another question where people could select more than one option, which is why those percentages add up to 100. We can see that the most popular behaviors were visiting parks and natural areas or feeding wild birds. We found a few differences when we were just comparing the amount of participation between consumptive and non-consumptive viewers. So consumptive viewers were generally just a bit more interested in some of these behaviors than non-consumptive wildlife viewers. And with that, I'm going to pass things back to Ashley, who's going to talk about some 5 key insights from the survey and the discussion.
Thanks, Emily. Appreciate it. So the way we've organized the remaining components of the results is that we have emphasized the key insights or recommendations that we suggest that you take away from the presentation, and then we have the data embedded within there. As I mentioned earlier in the presentation, there's a lot more in the report, but we're hoping that this is a way to stay focused on some of the key pieces that we think are really important for thinking about implementing the results. So in order for agencies and organizations in Kansas to better support wildlife viewers, there's 3 main recommendations that we have. One is providing more wildlife viewing information and access, and you'll see why in a moment here. 2 is promoting around the home viewing opportunities, and 3 is developing social support networks for wildlife viewing. And then additionally, we recommend that KDWP and partners broaden relevance to wildlife viewers who do not hunt or fish. And we'll show a little bit about why we'd recommend that based upon their current relationship with the agency and what might be an approach to do so. And then finally, develop financial contribution opportunities for wildlife viewers that can plug into supporting the agency. So let's go first to this recommendation number 1, providing more information and access. We give people a whole list of ways that KDWP could better support their wildlife viewing activities and allowed them to select which they would prefer. And you can see from this top list of the top responses that the word information is coming up again and again. About half of the respondents said they want more information about where to go to see wildlife, or more information about wildlife in Kansas generally. And then about a third said more information about where and when to view wildlife, where there's no hunting, and more information about how to view wildlife. And then additionally, about a little bit less than half said more access to places to go view wildlife. So we'll talk about that in a moment, but let's focus first on the information component. So if we look at the KDWP website related to wildlife viewing, there is information with wildlife viewing tips. It does emphasize how you can view wildlife, which of course is something that folks said that they had an interest in. And you can dig in a bit more by going into subsequent tabs within here, finding wildlife viewing sites, or a birding tab as well. And so there is information that can help expand awareness of resources in Kansas, but there may be opportunity to also build out this section of the website We've looked at a bunch of different state agencies' websites related to wildlife viewing, and one state that we've worked with in advance of these other states that are part of this broader project supported by the MultiState Grant is Virginia. So we started working with Virginia DWR about 6 years ago now, related to wildlife viewing. And as they redesigned their website, they created an entire section on viewing, and you can see it comes, or it is called out. Oops, sorry, that moved backwards. It's called out at the main set of tabs. So you can find wildlife viewing information the minute you get to the website. And then within there, it covers things like where to view wildlife, the basics side of things, which you all already have on your website in Kansas, as well as opportunities like birding festivals, and then wildlife cams, which are an opportunity for people to watch wildlife from their home. So these might be some things that are of interest. I will also say that the Wildlife Viewing and Nature Tourism Working Group is now starting a project where they are helping create and pull together from across many state agencies a set of template information that would be useful for all state agencies' websites, so that state agencies can pull whatever parts they think are of interest to them and plug in components that might be valuable. So there might be an opportunity in Kansas is to use some of those resources when they're created within the next year. We also ask people about their skill level related to wildlife viewing. And I think this is important as you think about providing information. Typically, when we think about birders specifically, but wildlife viewers generally, we may be thinking like, oh, they're pretty intermediate, advanced. They are really into getting out there, collecting citizen science data, and very involved in viewing. But if we actually look at the broader group of viewers that responded to this survey, as it was a general survey of viewers, we find that there's lots of beginners and novices. So 71% of the statewide group of wildlife viewers identify as beginner or novice. And so that really emphasizes why this more basic information was of interest to people. And this might be different than the group of wildlife viewers that you're used to hearing from, who are from birding clubs or Audubon chapters. And so we do really encourage you to think about how can the information that's on your website or the information that you're giving out in other ways really serve this beginner, novice, and intermediate, you can see as well, group of wildlife viewers. And that website really is a key place that people are interested in looking. We ask them about a whole long list of options for how they want to receive information from the agency. We specified, no, you will not actually receive this information just from selecting yes, so you're not signing up for something. But people really want that website and printed materials and then email updates. So a lot of those traditional mechanisms for reaching out are what people say is of interest to them. So here's the whole list. You will see that Facebook comes up as well, but the other types of social media are much lower, looking at TikTok and Twitter and even podcasts down further on the list. But I do want to call out in terms of differences, you'll see that there are some differences between consumptive and non-consumptive wildlife viewers. The consumptive viewers are more interested in receiving information related to wildlife viewing across the board. And so I think this is an important thing to think about, that group of folks who is very much plugged into the agency and interested in hearing from the agency. It's interested in specifically receiving information from the agency related to wildlife viewing in all of these ways. It is also useful to point out that there's probably some differences related to demographics, particularly age, associated with these different types of communication. And it's not an analysis that we've done, but it will certainly be something that anyone who downloads the data set could do if they were interested in finding out some more about this specific component. So the other question that we've had is we've seen this result related to access, not only in Kansas, but in a lot of other states. Is it that people say they want access to more sites to view because they don't know where the sites are that they can go viewing? Or is it because they truly have a lack of places where they can go? In Kansas, you all do have a birding trail. It may be that there's a great opportunity to make it even clearer to people that that birding trail is available, those sites are available, and then to also think about what sort of site locations do you have, And are they in the places where people are located? Are there urban related viewing opportunities on the birding trail or in places where you have the highest density of your population? The other thing that we'd encourage you to think about is, because wildlife viewers say that they are participating in state managed areas, it may be an opportunity to provide additional infrastructure and outreach on the value of wildlife viewing at those locations where you already are able to reach that group of people. And finally, the last piece of information that I wanted to share with you related to this question of access and availability of sites is that people really do have a concern about their ability to view based upon distance to viewing locations, their lack of free time and financial costs, which all emphasize that having viewing opportunities near your home or a not very far drive, or maybe even ones that you can get to through public transportation or that have no cost associated to them, can be ones that would make it easier for people to overcome these barriers to wildlife viewing. All right, Emily, do you want to tell us a little bit more about around the home interest?
Yes, I sure do. First, connected to that slide of the barriers and constraints, we see that the distance to wildlife viewing, the lack of free time, and the financial costs associated with wildlife viewing really point to the value of promoting around the home viewing opportunities that can be done in a variety of ways. First, we wanted to zoom out a little bit and show you where these wildlife viewers are participating in wildlife viewing in the state of Kansas. And you'll see on this slide that the majority of wildlife viewers, 78%, participate in wildlife viewing on their own home or property. I also wanted to highlight here that there was no difference or no statistically significant difference in that participation for consumptive and non-consumptive viewers, which further highlights how promoting around the home viewing can really be beneficial to all types of wildlife viewers in Kansas. There's also a great deal of interest in viewing on locally managed areas or state managed areas in Kansas that the KDWP may work with. And so one way that we thought that wildlife viewers in Kansas could participate in around the home viewing could be through like backyard wildlife habitat improvement. We were able to find a little bit of information from the Kansas website about the backyard wildlife habitat improvement program, but it was a little bit limited. If my memory serves me right, I think it might just be a PDF right now. There's also opportunities like working with the 2022 Kansas Big Birding Year that are working to promote around the home viewing or wildlife viewing that could be done closer to home. Wildlife viewing behaviors close to home can tie in really nicely with conservation behaviors. We surveyed wildlife viewers about their likelihood to participate in a variety of behaviors with or in support of the KDWP. You'll see that these yellow boxes highlight things that are related to that habitat management, like cleaning up trash or litter, enhancing wildlife habitat, or collecting data on wildlife or habitat, known as community or citizen science. Did want to highlight that this black graph is everybody in Kansas, so the consumptive and non-consumptive viewers are all rolled into here. One idea for potentially promoting more wildlife viewing or kind of connecting to broader audiences of wildlife viewers in Kansas could be done through just a simple picking up trash or litter day. Over half of the respondents in Kansas said that they were very or extremely likely to engage in cleaning up trash or litter with the KDWP. Potentially holding one of these events, you could have information about wildlife viewing. This could be a way to bring in people who might not be so familiar with the agency and a behavior that they're already likely to participate in, and then just start to connect them in a little bit more with what the KDWP is and how they can participate in wildlife viewing. The other two conservation behaviors that were most popular in Kansas were purchasing products that benefit the wildlife or whose proceeds go to benefit wildlife or conservation, and then civic engagement related to wildlife conservation, so voting or advocating for policies that benefit the environment. Now we're going to shift into our third key recommendation for supporting wildlife viewers in Kansas, and that is to develop social support networks for wildlife viewers. A few series of questions in our survey asked about the extent of social support perceived by wildlife viewers from their family, friends, peers, or mentors. And we found that wildlife viewers feel like they're already getting a lot of support from their family and friends in wildlife viewing. Maybe they're going and participating in these activities together, but there wasn't as much perceived support from peers and especially mentors. So we thought that mentorship opportunity was one way that the KDWP and partners could step in. potentially through a program that's focused on supporting BIPOC viewers in Kansas. Now you'll notice that there was less participation from BIPOC, only 16% of our wildlife viewers in Kansas were BIPOC. And this might be because something known as the don't loop, which is essentially a theory that states if you don't meet others who are engaged in a particular activity, the odds are you will not take interest in that activity yourself. And this really highlights the importance of those mentorship roles to kind of serve as an example of participating in wildlife viewing and making it more inclusive to a broader audience. One case study that we talked about in our national report that I sent the link to previously comes from South Carolina with their BIPOC community engagement. In 2015, they developed a community engagement program and actually hired a Hispanic outreach coordinator who worked to develop bilingual resources and help to enhance outreach strategies with that group. It was a really successful program, and in 2020, they actually launched a second phase of this program with a similar strategy to reach their Black population of wildlife viewers. Another audience that we suggest focusing greater inclusion on could be wildlife viewers who have a disability or an accessibility challenge. In our survey, we asked wildlife viewers, to what extent do you experience accessibility challenges when you're participating in wildlife viewing? We pulled the definition of accessibility challenges as the difficulties someone experiences in interacting with or using the physical or social environment while trying to engage in a meaningful activity, such as wildlife viewing or birding. This may be a result of a mobility challenge, blindness or low vision, intellectual or developmental disabilities, mental illness, being deaf or hard of hearing, or other health concerns. And in Kansas, we found that just about a third of wildlife viewers experienced somewhat, quite a bit, or a great deal of accessibility challenges when wildlife viewing. And I did want to highlight how this number compares to the nationwide. According to the CDC, about 24-25% of all Americans experience some form of accessibility challenge or disability. Disabilities are often something that I think people don't realize the extent of. You can have visible and invisible disabilities, and considering the fact here in Kansas, 1 or 3 of wildlife viewers identifies having an accessibility challenge, this may be a great audience to work with. I'm actually working with Ashley in another paper just all dedicated to disability and wildlife viewing. But for right now, we did want to highlight one map associated with the organization Birdability Autobahn. This is an organization that highlights accessible wildlife viewing locations and just posts them online on this GIS map in collaboration with Autobahn. So this might be one way that Kansas or other partner or the KDWB or other organizations could work to connect further with people with disabilities just by spotlighting these places that they could go and participate in wildlife viewing that are relatively accessible. And with that, I'm going to pass things off to Ashley for our next 2 recommendations before wrapping up the presentation.
Great. Thanks so much, Emily. So let's talk about broadening relevance to wildlife viewers who do not hunt or fish. So we have shared with you that there's about 50% of your viewers who are consumptive viewers, as we've termed it, and about 50% that are non-consumptive viewers. And what I think is really important to think about is they do have pretty different perceptions and experiences with KWP. You can see in our previous slides that the differences weren't so great as they got to their preferences for information, and general patterns stayed the same. But with non-consumptive viewers, it really seems like there's an opportunity to increase basic familiarity with the agency and provide tailored support to them. So let me show you the evidence that supports that. First, we ask people, how familiar are you with KDWP? At the top here, you can see the statewide related results, and then followed by the consumptive and non-consumptive specific results. And one thing that you'll notice is that there's a lot more folks with those darker colors when it gets to the level of familiarity amongst the consumptive group. So about a third say they're very familiar or extremely familiar with the agency, where it's only about 13% that say that they're very familiar or extremely familiar amongst the non-consumptive viewers. So there really is an opportunity to expand familiarity with the agency amongst people who don't hunt and angle, but are wildlife viewers. We also asked people about, have you seen the logo before of the agency? And in some agencies where their logo is pretty different for the State Fish and Wildlife Agency compared to other agencies in the state, we saw some stark differences amongst consumptive and non-consumptive viewers. That's not the case for you all because your state agency has or your department has the same as all of those in your state. So people are a little bit more used to that. So about 95% of people said, yeah, I've seen that before. So that's not as helpful for thinking about the familiarity differences, but we thought that you'd find that interesting. And then in terms of participation in programs or services, we provided people with a list of programs and services. We tried to keep these general so that they worked for the national and regional survey as well as the state specific survey. Darren and Chris helped us choose those options to ask people about that were relevant to your agency and actually things that are offered by your state agency. Couple of key things to point out here. First, information's coming up again, right? So people are saying that the thing that they've used the most is information as well as the state agency lands and nature centers and visitor centers. The other thing to point out is that there's a pretty big difference here between the consumptive and non-consumptive viewers. So people who hunt and fish and also view are using the programs and services a lot more than people who view but do not hunt and fish. And if we look all the way down at the last option that says I've used no KDWP programs or services in the last 5 years, you'll see that almost half of the non-consumptive viewers are giving that response, which is quite high. In comparison to the consumptive viewers, that's about a third, and also it's quite high compared to what we saw in some of the other states as well. We also looked at people's use or past purchasing experience of opportunities to give non-voluntary contributions to the state agency as well as voluntary contributions. That's how we've split this up. We didn't necessarily use these words with our survey participants, but first we're going to look at that set of non-voluntary contributions, which are like licenses, fees, where people need to pay for something in order to actually get something that they want to be able to have access to. And then there's things that we would term a voluntary contribution, like paying for a conservation license plate or a donation that you're not required to do to participate in an activity. So when we look at which purchases or contributions people have made in the last 5 years, we can see that fishing licenses are most popular amongst consumptive viewers, while lands access passes, permits, or entrance fees are most popular amongst the non-consumptive viewers. And that's different than what we see in some of the states where that wasn't as high for non-consumptive viewers, but you're one of those state agencies that has parks in it as well. Many of the other state agencies we worked with only had the wildlife management areas as public lands that the agency offered. The other thing to point out is that there are people, non-consumptive viewers, who are purchasing fishing licenses. And we don't know for sure why they said they did that in the last 5 years, but that they aren't someone who fished in the last 5 years. It could be they purchased but didn't actually make it out there. It could be they purchased for someone else in their family. It could be that they purchased in order to have access to some sort of land or opportunity, or it may be because they've heard that they can support the State Fish and Wildlife Agency if they purchase a fishing license. We know that some states have actually had specific campaigns about that. And this is something that we saw in a lot of the states, that non-consumptive viewers were still purchasing fishing licenses to some degree. And then you can see that many of the options get a lot lower with the hunting license not being popular at all amongst non-consumptive viewers, and fees for programs or events also being quite low. But in comparison to the voluntary options, non-voluntary options had a lot more participation. So here you can see the voluntary options where we never get above 20%, which is quite different than within the non-voluntary options. So people don't have to pay for something in order to get something else that they want to have access to or to follow the regulations. They aren't as likely to do that. The most popular were tangible products or a donation of the part of their state income tax amongst consumptive viewers and also non-consumptive viewers. But again, you can see that there was a lower proportion of those non-consumptive viewers giving in that way. So again, we see all of these alternative opportunities being most popular amongst consumptive viewers, although in some cases those differences aren't significantly different. So that's where you see no stars. So it seems that, again, we have the non-consumptive viewer less engaged in supporting the agency financially, as well as participating in programs and services. A place where we see some common ground, though, is the benefits that people perceive to having more opportunities or receiving more programming related to viewing wildlife. We asked them, do you feel like your agency is doing too little or too much or just about the right amount for wildlife viewers? And whether we're talking about consumptive or non-consumptive viewers, very few people felt like it was too much. Most people said, yeah, they're doing they're prioritizing this the right amount. But about a third of non-consumptive viewers and a little bit less than a third said our agency could do more. So I think that there's a lot of common ground here in seeing that it's, about a third of viewers, regardless of whether they're viewers that hunt and fish or viewers who do not, that do think that KDWP could do more to prioritize programs and services for wildlife viewing. All right, so let's talk a bit more about financial contribution opportunities in the future. So you saw that there's not a lot of participation in the non-voluntary mechanisms, and that within the voluntary mechanisms, within the non-voluntary mechanisms, again, we see that the consumptive folks are most interested. Now, we asked people, what might you be interested in the future? And they were given the options of saying, not at all interested, slightly, moderately, very, and extremely likely to purchase these. And all of their interests in the future were higher than what they've been doing in the past, which is a common human trait that people think they're going to do more than they actually are. But it also shows that there's potential opportunity to reach out to and support and connect viewers, regardless of what type of viewer we're talking about, with these financial contribution opportunities, so that there's not a barrier of them not being aware of the opportunity, or not a barrier of them not knowing how to provide funding in that way. The Lands Access Pass was of most of interest, followed closely behind by fishing licenses, as well as fees for a program or event. And that was much higher than what is currently being done related to fees for programs or events. So that might be an area of potential growth for the agency to gain more funding. And the voluntary options were much higher. Remember, it was no more than 20% in the case of any of these. But a lot of people saying that they'd be willing to purchase tangible items, a conservation lottery ticket should it be available, or a conservation license plate. So I think, again, these are providing some insights for directions that you could go to make sure that these sorts of opportunities are of interest to people. The thing that I do want to point out about that is that we found that viewers were more likely, regardless of what type of viewer, to want to give funding if they knew what the funding was going towards. So we gave them a whole list of options of what the funding might be towards, and across the board, they said, yes, we would give more money if it was for habitat. We would give more money if it was for viewing opportunities. We would give more money if it was specifically for rare species. So I think the take home from that is, if people know that the funds are going towards some sort of specific need related to wildlife or need related to viewing, they're more likely to purchase and donate than if they just think it's going to the general fund related to the department. Virginia's had similar findings from work that they've done, and the direction they took that was to create a specific wildlife viewer donation opportunity, similar to what you might see for a nonprofit organization, where they could increase their connection with viewers, really target it towards the younger wildlife viewer, and they earmarked those funds for species habitat conservation. They did not do it for viewing opportunities themselves, although I would suspect that that might also be of interest. So if you're interested in checking out that program called the Restore the Wild program, Emily's provided a link to it. You can see they have membership levels with different benefits that come with those as well. And this is a case study that we also have written up in the national level report. All right, so let's shift to talking about next steps. And this is where we hope we can springboard off for a conversation, as well as answer any specific questions that you have. So feel free to go ahead and throw any questions that you have in the chat pod while you're listening to me talk a little bit about what we're planning to do next. So we have heard from AFWA that we were recommended for a phase 2 multi-state grant. We're awaiting our final approval and paperwork from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And we anticipate that that will be coming by the end of the year. So in this multi-state grant that we again developed with the Wildlife Viewing and Nature Tourism Working Group, we've committed to doing work in 4 areas. I've got 3 on here, and then the 4th one on my next slide. One is distributing our results even further at workshops, at conferences, at meetings. We heard through our meeting at the Wildlife Viewing and Nature Tourism Academy in February of last year that state agencies reps felt that these results really needed to get out broadly and to leadership within their organizations and agencies, as well as to other agencies and organizations. So we're going to be spending some time taking it beyond what we've been doing with these webinars. There was also interest in getting more peer support, as well as more support from Virginia Tech and our team that's worked on this survey, in making sure that the results of the survey are being implemented in a way that's evidence-based, but also drawing upon the practices and experiences of other states, so that everyone doesn't feel like they're recreating their own wheel, especially since a lot of the state findings were quite similar. So that community of practice is going to be a network that will meet monthly, and one representative from each state is asked to participate and then go back and work with a team within their state in between each of those monthly meetings to move along a specific project based upon the results. And we're asking each state to just choose one project that you really feel like is important for being part of this group effort. And then from there, we hope to develop a website with the resources that states have created. So those can be inspiration or templates for other states who might want to implement in the future, as well as showcase these examples and show who they worked with within their state in terms of partners, what sort of outcomes they achieved if they got that far, or what sort of approach they used to get to that place. So we're really hoping that Kansas will join us in that. We are having an initial meet and greet amongst the folks who are part of the community of practice in late January or early February. And we hope to have our contract coming along not too much longer after that, so that we'll start working to support states in those projects. And of course, they're welcome to get going on it even sooner. There's no cost for participation in this. And in fact, I'll talk in a moment about a benefit that states will receive besides the opportunity to be supported by their peers and by us in this. Additionally, we're going to be doing some further analysis. We're going to be doing a rural and urban related analysis. The state agencies that were with us at the Academy said, we really want to know more about these urban wildlife viewers. Do they differ from rural wildlife viewers? Is this really the place for us to reach more of the Black, Indigenous, and people of color who might be viewers? So those are questions that we're going to be answering and be able to provide webinar as well as a report on as well at the national and regional level. We also encourage you to think about things that you might want to do in terms of analysis. There's opportunities to look at income level or levels of specialization or expertise or the age of viewers. So those are things that you can think about. You have access to the data set and you're welcome to run with it. And then finally, as Emily mentioned, we are doing more work looking at accessibility challenges and the needs of people who identify as having accessibility challenges, so that agencies and partners can think about how to better serve disabled people in wildlife viewing. And then all the states that are participating in the community of practice are encouraged to join us for a one-day workshop before the Pathways Conference. And the Pathways Conference is a human dimensions of wildlife related conference that Colorado State University has hosted for years. This year it's being co-hosted with the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies and with us at Virginia Tech. And the focus this year is looking at people and within the state and how their values are shifting. People's relationship with wildlife is no longer primarily as a traditional sort of approach related to hunting or fishing or thinking of how wildlife can be used. But if you look at the broad public in a lot of states, it's shifting more towards people having a relationship with wildlife where they're interested in thinking about wildlife as sort of an extension of their family, as something that they care for and that they try to protect. And in many cases, that's the non-consumptive viewer, we assume, within our results, although we haven't been able to make that comparison yet. We're hoping to on a future study that we're doing. This conference is going to focus a lot on wildlife viewing. It will also provide a training on human dimensions after the conference through Fish and Wildlife Service, if anyone's interested in that. And there's going to be a lot of talks, panels, symposia that are really targeted at people who work with the public related to wildlife and providing evidence from the social sciences, as well as examples and lessons learned from programs and activities that other agencies or organizations have been trying with the public. So we encourage you all to attend that. And we also hope that we'll have at least one state rep from Kansas. We will have partial funding support for one representative to attend that conference, but more are welcome to join us for the conference and the workshop. So that just a reminder that we've only scratched the surface of the findings here. We've hoped that you've gotten some key takeaways and insights that will be relevant to you and useful to you based upon how we've organized this presentation today. But we encourage you to look at the executive summary and the recommendations from the Kansas report, and then to dig into any other section that's of interest to you. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me or Emily. I encourage you to start with Emily. I'm on sabbatical right now, and so my inbox is not as closely monitored as it normally would be. But Emily's happy to connect with you and connect with me if needed. Additionally, we'll drop this in the chat pod, but before you leave here today, we just ask you to take a really brief evaluation survey about this presentation. And part of that is we ask, what sort of ways do you see yourself using these results? And that's really helpful for us as we think about phase 2 of this project and think about how states might be either the agency or the organizations within the state might be implementing these results so that we can make sure that our future website has resources related to that. So with that, we can stop now. I think I'll stop sharing so we can see everybody's faces. Happy to answer questions. Since we're a small group here, people are welcome to come off of mute and ask those yourself. And additionally, I think I might turn it over to Chris first to see if Chris has any comments on key parts that he wants to emphasize from what we presented today.
Yeah, and thank you both, Ashley and Emily, for providing those results. And I think there's a lot of information there that, you know, we gained a better understanding, and also a lot there that we probably already knew. And things that have been pointed out to us, you know, that may help be able to get some of those things changed. You know, the need for information and the pointing out that our website's lacking a lot of that information too. We've been dealing with that for quite some time, and Matt knows when he worked with us as well as an agency person, that's always been one of our struggles within the agency, is to get those type of things changed and up to date. So that is something that they're looking at hopefully doing within the next year. So that'll hopefully be a huge improvement and just a new format, so it's easier for everyone to change their pages instead of just a struggle to get those, you know, a handful of people selected to make changes when it requires quite a few. Also, as far as the voluntary funding, it's interesting that the discussion and the results for the license plate, because we just had that passed through our legislature last year to allow a license plate to start in January of this year or next year. And so we'll see how that goes and how, you know, how folks purchase that right. It is a little different within like the other states where the complete donation goes to The Wildlife Agency, our state is actually taking, and if you purchase a license plate, you actually get access to our state parks by purchasing that plate too. So that's a component added to it. It's a general passport to our state park office or any of our state parks, so you can go in and utilize those facilities, wildlife viewing, fishing, boating, all those kind of activities. You then are opened up to access to all the state park amenities that are available. So recreational trails and things like that. So that's kind of I think an important step for that. Hopefully will and drive people to purchase that. We've always provided a passport for quite a few years, but this will allow it to be done on the license plate too. So that's a new opportunity. Yeah, lots of other information. We have really good programs for hunting and fishing access programs. And it's just a matter of trying to figure out how we can make those work for wildlife viewing as well, without a conflict between, the viewer and the recreational user as far as the sportsman. So, other than that, I think those were kind of some of the main things. There's lots of information there, so I'd be interested to hear what some of the others have to say.
Feel free to jump right on in. Thanks, Chris, for sharing your thoughts, and good to hear about ways that you think these results can be plugged in. Matt, Laura, Nicole, Steve, any thoughts?
Hey, Ashley and Emily, thank you and Chris for the really important information. Excuse me. I'm curious about, one of the questions I have, obviously from our bend and doing environmental education, is what early experiences with wildlife viewing, how they impact and influence sort of a lifetime of that. My guess is that they do. When young people have the opportunities to go out and learn about wildlife viewing and experience it, that they're more likely to continue to do it as adults. Do you have any data around that?
I think Emily should probably take this. This study specifically didn't look at it, but Emily's been involved in a project at Virginia Tech that was actually a graduate student run grant that they got from Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources to look at this very question. So Emily, go for it.
Yeah, I have kind of two key things to point out. One is I'm loading it, but we did ask wildlife viewers in Kansas if they would like the agency to provide additional programs and services for youth or children in their household. And I'll put that number in the chat. But working with Virginia Tech and the Virginia DWR, we did see that participation in environmental education and programming does really increase the likelihood of participating in conservation behaviors and overall identifying as a conservationist, as well as their continued interest in not only careers for wildlife viewing. I work with children who have expressed a lot of interest in working with wildlife, and they didn't really know that was an option before coming to our programs. But it just also kind of opens up that passion, kind of brings them into the environment where they may have not had that opportunity prior, especially in urban areas where there's less direct connection to that historic nature kind of set aside from a city or an urban landscape.
And Emily, some of that was in the literature review link that you provided earlier on. And Laura, we are also going to send out a list of all the links that we provided. It will come in the new year, but you can see that there. Oh, and BIPOC is Black, Indigenous, people of color.
No, I was wondering if that had an impact. Yeah.
Sorry, it wasn't
sure.
on
Increasing interest in BIPOC.
Emily, do you recall if there was information specific to BIPOC people?
The BIPOC in this report?
No. Again, with the wildlife viewing experiences.
In the literature review I sent, we do talk a lot about encouraging participation from BIPOC students and how they're less represented in environmental and just wildlife related education and recreation.
Great. So while Emily is bringing up the specifics about interests in more youth-related programming, any other questions or comments? Matt.
Yeah, I was just kind of thinking from our work, when we do a lot, we try to promote or try to motivate people to do, habitat conservation work and just conservation work in general. One thing we talk about a lot is, all the ecosystem services that habitat and that work would provide. And recreation is always something that we do mention, as part of those services and a potential source of income for private landowners. But we usually talk about that in terms of hunting, and we kind of maybe say in passing, wildlife viewing, but we probably don't define that very well, and we probably don't message it back out to those wildlife viewers about, the kind of work that we're doing and what that may mean to them. And so I can see some of this, trying to help inform some of that a little bit, some of those messagings around that. And then the other thing I was thinking about was, how do you turn viewers or even consumptive users into more of an advocate and more of a conservationist and to support more of that kind of work? And just because you buy a hunting license doesn't make you a conservationist, And so, both sides there, I think, I would be curious to know how you move that needle for those folks into more of that realm. And thinking about, the whole 3 billion birds thing that came out, that was out there, it was a big deal, and then it's kind of gone away, and it's not really, I don't think, went the direction anybody had hoped it would have. And so, how knowing what we know about viewers and what they like and some of the things that they're interested in, how does that help inform that kind of work? Where, if birds is the number one thing and birds are declining, tremendously, how do we connect those two things? So just some of the thoughts that I was thinking of while in presentation.
Yeah, great thoughts, Matt. So first, I just provided again in a screenshot, but I can also share my screen here. That might be easier. Just a reminder about the results that really did show that people are interested in viewing in a locally managed area or a property of a friend or family or on their own home. So I do think that's really strong evidence to support what you were talking about, and it might be what you were thinking about when you were thinking about this. So I do think that there's potential for agricultural producers to be thinking about opening up their land for viewing and potentially as a revenue opportunity as well. So I'd agree with you that I think that there's opportunity there. And I do know some folks that were involved in that. Like I had a colleague who worked at WWF out of South Dakota for a while. And probably about 10 years ago, she was working on a program like that with ranchers, and I'm happy to connect you with her if that would be helpful. And they were actually basing it on a program that had been done in Namibia with agricultural producers. And they actually took the South Dakota ranchers to Namibia to learn about it. A little bit different wildlife, but you still have some cool wildlife out there in the Great Plains. So yeah, I think that there certainly are opportunities for that, and having that access is something that people said was a challenge for them. Now the question is, are the people who are having those access challenges in the rural areas, or are they in the urban areas? And if they are in the urban areas, how close are they to an agricultural producer that they could be connected with? But, certainly thinking about birding festival tie-in to private land and such, I think is an exciting way to go as well. And then I totally agree with you with the point about just because you buy a hunting license doesn't mean that you're purposefully someone who contributes to conservation. Now, certainly some people are, and certainly they really think about themselves in that way. And I mean, I've even talked with a lot of hunters who say, I'm a conservationist because I'm helping keep the deer herds under control. And so they actually think of the act of hunting as a conservation activity itself too. And it looks like you're agreeing that you've heard that too. In terms of moving people towards other mechanisms and ways of thinking about conservation, I think that having those support networks and other people who are important to you, emphasizing that it's something that's important or inviting you to go do something is really a useful way to think about it. That don't loop of people being involved in wildlife recreation, we could think about it as a don't loop for people being involved in conservation activities too. If your friends aren't doing it, people that you know aren't doing it, it can be hard for you to think about it. You know, I think about in my own neighborhood, I'm in a neighborhood that's very much everybody's into planting native plants in their yard, and they have their signs up. And so you feel like, oh, I'm amongst these other people who are all doing this, I better do it too. But if you're in another place, you might not have that same thinking. So I think that is one thing to be thinking about. I think, you know, the other thing we saw here is that there's a lot of interest in litter cleanups. That's the thing that people have gotten drilled into their mind, like clean up the trash. And can you have an opportunity for people to go out and do a trash pickup, but also learn about invasive species and do invasive species pull at the same time? And they're starting to realize that, yes, there are other activities that you can do. So I think, you know, in some cases we say that like knowledge is not necessarily the key thing to keep in mind to change people's behavior. But I do think for the people who have a propensity to have an interest in wildlife or have an interest in conservation, if they aren't aware of what things they can get involved in because they don't have that social network telling them about it, or they don't think they have the right skills for it, that can be a barrier. So thinking about ways that you can connect them to it and that have low barriers to entry, right? Like, how can I make this an easy first step? And then move on to the next step, and then move on to the next step too. So those would be some of the things that I would encourage you to think about.
I do also kind of want to give one example. So I'm not sure if you have a similar program in Kansas, and I apologize if you do, but we worked with South Dakota, and they have a Hunt 101 program as well as a Fish 101, which is a program where they try to bring in consumptive viewers, and they've had like pretty moderate success with recruiting people who had never participated in hunting or angling before joining the program. And now they're actually working on developing a very similar program, but like a View 101. And this is another kind of example of a program that could kind of bring in new audiences to the agency and help them understand wildlife viewing and kind of that connection to conservation as well. And I just sent in a flyer about the program and kind of what I've just found online really quickly.
Yeah, and Matt, I know you work a lot with the Farm Bill and voluntary public access program as part of that Farm Bill. And I think maybe there could be some ways to, you know, maybe not shift any focus, but expand the focus of some of those programs. I know some of the states do include some of those other recreational activities within their VPA so that those private landowners are compensated for some of those activities as well, and maybe expanding that and using that ability in Kansas, where, you know, some of the other funding that typically state agencies are using as Piven Robertson funds don't really allow for that non-sportsman activities. So VPA fits right in with some of those type of activities as well for wildlife viewing. And I think too that, you know, the backyard habitat brochure that they showed on the slideshow obviously needs updated, and we've been working with the Kansas Wildlife Federation folks on trying to, you know, get that updated, maybe rebrand, shift focus, whatever the case might be, to provide more information out on that program. It's not well publicized. We haven't, and you know, admittedly, as an agency, haven't really advertised that program well within the last few years. And as we step up the roles with providing pollinator seed mixes and things like those to folks for, you know, for their own backyard type plantings. But I do think there's that easy connection there with some of that pollinator work that in backyards that, you know, can drive folks to wildlife viewing, and obviously providing, you know, habitat for species and drawing those species into their backyards to do that. And hopefully, I think if you can get them hooked that way, maybe they can see that difference, and maybe that expands to other areas as well.
I think that's a great point, Chris. It's like a positive feedback loop, right? You see that what you've done makes a difference, and then move on. In our limited time here at the end, is there anything that you want to say about phase 2 projects, what you're thinking about in Kansas, or what opportunities might exist for the partner organizations to collaborate?
Sorry, is that a question for Chris or?
Sorry, that cut out on me. I didn't think.
Oh, sorry, Chris. I was just wondering if you wanted to specifically speak at all to ideas that you had for a phase 2 project and anything about partnering opportunities for the partner organizations here.
Yeah, I think that we're interested in joining in part of the phase 2. We haven't had a whole lot of time with some of the other duties that we have to really put much thought into it and trying to find that specific project. But if any of you are interested in doing that phase 2 and looking at that, for sure reach out to Darren or I, and then we can kind of discuss that internally and see what might fit best, or or maybe we can do more than one, but at least connecting with the phase 2 part of this project would be one of our goals to hopefully move forward with. So if we can find a partner that's that is interested in working with us.
Great, sounds good. So sounds like Darren's the person to reach out to there. Any last questions or comments? All right, well, we appreciate everybody's time for joining us here today, and the good conversation that we had here at the end. Emily, could you throw the eval survey in again, just as a quick request to give us a little feedback and thoughts on how this information could be useful to you. And we hope that we will see a group from Kansas joining our team and implementing a project based upon these results. And hopefully that can be a nice Kickstarter to the partners working together on working to serve wildlife viewers even more in the state. And it sounds like also you all at the agency have some plans already based on the results. So that's great to hear too. So thanks for sharing that today, Chris. Really appreciate it.
And one additional thing is this was recorded. So if anyone in your agency or your organization or another organization that you maybe should have heard the presentation, we can provide that recording to them as well, and allow them, as well as PowerPoints and things like that both Ashley and Emily provided today. So again, I appreciate you guys' interest in this and joining us today. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. We'll send the recording out after we clean the captions, just to make sure it's accessible for everyone. So it might take a few weeks as we're going offline for the holidays.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, bye-bye. Happy holidays.
Yep.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.